Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Ready to explore some ancient wisdom. Today, we're diving into the world of ancient Mesopotamia and their fascinating approach to holistic health.
Always up for a journey back in time, especially when it involves unlocking the secrets of health and well-being from civilizations that existed thousands of years ago.
And to guide us on this journey, we have an essay published just today by Joseph Aminian, who makes some pretty mind-blowing connections between ancient Mesopotamian practices and some surprisingly modern perspectives.
Arminian starts by taking us straight to the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, as it was known.
Okay, so remind me, what's so important about the Fertile Crescent?
Well, this is where the Sumerians flourish, one of the world's very first civilizations, and they developed groundbreaking concepts in, well, pretty much everything, including holistic health.
Holistic health? Thousands of years ago. That's incredible. What did they even mean by holistic health?
You know, it's actually not that different from how we understand it today. They didn't see the body, mind, and spirit as separate. They were totally interconnected. A very modern concept that they grasped way back then.
That's amazing, but how did they develop and pass on this knowledge? Do they have, like, ancient medical schools?
Well, think of the city of Ur as a central hub for their wisdom. They had a system of healers, the Asu and the Ashipu.
Asu and Ashipu, those are some interesting names.
Right. The Asu, they were like the surgeons of their day. They focused on physical treatments, using herbal remedies, maybe even early types of surgery.
And the Ashipu.
They dealt with the spiritual and supernatural causes of illness. So let's say you felt spiritually out of balance. The Ashipu would help you restore that balance through rituals, prayers, incantations, that sort of thing.
Fascinating. It's like they had specialists for every aspect of a person's being.
And get this, they even incorporated astrology into their diagnoses and treatments.
Astrology. Really?
Absolutely. They believed that celestial events could directly impact a person's well-being. Like there was this deep connection between us and the cosmos.
I've heard that idea echoed in certain spiritual traditions today. Now, Arminian brings up this concept, Ashik. Did I see that right?
Ashik, yeah. It's from ancient Khazarian Oghuz Turkic tradition, and it basically emphasizes kindness and love for all life, every living being.
That's beautiful. It's like this universal truth, isn't it? Kindness equals well-being.
Yeah, it resonates with the Hebrew concept of chest, which also means like loving kindness.
So it wasn't just about treating physical symptoms. It was about cultivating a way of being in the world.
Exactly. And that connects to the ancient Khazarian Oghuz Turkic term chashlich and the Pahlavi term choshi, which both emphasize balance, inner harmony.
Okay, so kindness, balance, harmony, all interconnected. It's all starting to make sense.
And you know what else is interesting? Arminian talks about the shift from hunter-gatherer societies to farming and how that impacted the Mesopotamian understanding of, well, nature's role in health.
Now, that's a connection I wouldn't have made.
Yeah.
How did that transition change their views?
They started viewing the orchard as this representation of balance. You know, not just a place to grow food, but this sacred space that symbolizes the abundance and harmony found in nature.
Is it kind of like the Garden of Eden, that idea of perfect balance?
That's a great comparison. And it's not just the Garden of Eden. Think about words like pards, paradise, orchard. They all point to this deep reverence for nature, right? It was vital for well-being. And even in their architecture, think of those gorgeous traditional Persian garden houses, the pars.
I love those. They're designed to blend seamlessly with nature.
Exactly. Living in harmony with nature was like built into their lifestyle, their architecture. And get this, Persia itself, the name, translates to land of orchards or even land of the people of orchards.
Wow, so it's deeply rooted in their culture. Speaking of roots, here's something that really blew my mind when I was reading Arminian's essay. The Mesopotamians used sound as a healing tool.
It might sound surprising, but it makes total sense. You know how sound and vibration affect us, right?
Oh yeah, think about how music can completely change your mood. Or a calming sound just melts your stress away.
That's exactly what they were tapping into way back then. They believed certain sounds had therapeutic qualities, especially the mokam, which refers to the melodic calls of birds.
Like birdsong.
Yep. They thought those sounds had healing properties.
Well, I mean, birdsong is incredibly soothing. It makes me feel relaxed instantly.
Right. And the Khazarian Oghuz Turkic people, who descended from the Mesopotamians, they developed wordless melodies called mogams specifically to imitate those bird songs.
Wow. So they were creating their own sound therapy.
Pretty much. And it's not unique to them. Even in Yiddish and Hebrew traditions, you have nigunim, which are these wordless tunes thought to enhance mental health. It's fascinating how these different cultures across time all recognized the healing power of sound.
It's like they were intuitively aware of something that science is only now beginning to understand. It's amazing, really.
Isn't it? It makes you wonder what else they might have understood that we're just now rediscovering.
Now, there's one thing we need to talk about before we move on. Their belief that language itself can influence holistic health. This is where my mind starts to bend a little.
It's a powerful idea for sure. They believed language held power beyond just communication. And it ties into another belief of theirs that consciousness could be preserved and transferred through genetic information.
Wait, are we talking about reincarnation here?
We don't know for sure if they use that specific term, but their practices of preserving bones and burials suggests this belief in consciousness continuing beyond death, like a part of you lives on.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. And this is where the role of mothers becomes super important, right?
Absolutely. Mothers were seen as the guardians of all this wisdom, responsible for passing down the knowledge through the generations.
It's like they were entrusted with keeping this ancient wisdom alive.
Exactly. And, it all comes back to the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire.
Oh yeah, those were central to their worldview. Wow.
Totally. They represented the fundamental building blocks of life, and guess what? They were each associated with the matriarchs in ancient Jewish culture.
That's incredible. It's like these women were seen as embodiments of these essential forces that kept everything in balance.
Precisely. And it all speaks to this worldview that values interconnectedness. Everyone contributes to the well-being of the whole community.
This is so much deeper than I imagined. I was thinking herbs and rituals, but it's like a whole philosophy of life.
It is. And what's even more fascinating is how it connects to some modern ideas and discoveries. We'll dig into that more after a quick break.
So, we've been talking about this Mesopotamian idea of reverence for nature, this interconnectedness of all things. Rabbi Manis Friedman, in his teachings, he really highlights how these ancient concepts are relevant even today, He suggests that we can actually gain these really deep insights into, ourselves and our place in the world by revisiting this ancient wisdom. I'm really fascinated by this idea of bridging ancient wisdom with modern understanding. Can you give me an example of how Rabbi Friedman connects those ideas, especially in the context of, Mesopotamian health practices?
Well, Rabbi Friedman, he often points out that ancient cultures, especially those, at the root of Jewish tradition, they possessed this knowledge, right? It might seem kind of esoteric to us now, but it reflects a deep understanding of the human condition. And he sees this connection, for example, between the Mesopotamian emphasis on preserving bones in burial practices and the Jewish tradition of doing the same.
Oh, that's right. They both have that in common. But why bones specifically? What's so significant about them?
Well, remember how we talked about the Mesopotamians' belief that consciousness could be transferred through genetic information? Well, Rabbi Friedman, he points out that bones, they're the most durable carriers of that genetic information. So by preserving them, it's almost like they were ensuring the continuity of that consciousness,
So it's not just about preserving the physical remains, it's about preserving a part of the person's essence.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you wonder, right? Did they understand something about the nature of consciousness and its connection to the physical body that we're only now beginning to rediscover?
It's really mind-blowing when you think about it that way. Now, let's go back to that idea of mothers as the keepers of this wisdom. I'm curious to explore that further.
Yeah.
Did they have specific roles, or practices related to health and healing in Mesopotamian culture?
Well, mothers were really highly revered in Mesopotamian society. I mean, they weren't just caregivers. They were seen as these stewards of knowledge responsible for transmitting the cultural and spiritual traditions to future generations.
It's interesting. We link this back to the four elements. Remember, earth, water, air, fire, which were so central to their understanding of the world, right? Is there a connection there to the role of mothers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Those elements, they represent the fundamental building blocks of life, right? And guess what? They were each associated with the matriarchs of ancient Jewish culture. These women, they weren't just figures in a family tree. They were seen as embodiments of these essential forces, ensuring the well-being of their communities.
Wow. So it's they were these grounding forces, the anchors, responsible for maintaining that balance and harmony that we keep talking about.
Exactly. And it speaks to this worldview that valued interconnectedness, recognizing the importance of each individual's contribution to the well-being of the whole.
I have to admit, when we first started talking about ancient Mesopotamian health practices, I had this very different picture in my mind. Like I was thinking exotic herbs, strange rituals, but it's so much deeper than that.
I know, right? And what's so striking is how some of their practices and beliefs, they sort of foreshadow modern discoveries. For example, think about the gut-brain connection. It's all the rage these days, right?
Oh, yeah. It's amazing how much we're learning about that connection. How did the Mesopotamians view that connection? Did they have specific practices, related to gut health?
Well, while we don't have detailed records of their dietary practices, it's pretty likely they understood the link between what they consumed and their mental and emotional states. Their whole focus on balance and harmony, it suggests that they recognized the importance of nourishing the body with foods that promoted well-being, not just filling it up.
And now, of course, with all the research on the microbiome and gut bacteria, we're seeing how crucial that gut health is for everything, from like mood regulation to immune function.
Exactly. It's almost like they intuitively grasped this interconnectedness centuries ago, and science is now catching up, providing evidence for what they seem to understand on a much deeper level.
It's fascinating to think about all the things we might be able to learn from them. And it's not just the gut-brain connection, right? Think about their use of sound healing with those mogums imitating bird songs. We have music therapy and sound healing modalities that utilize like specific frequencies to promote relaxation and healing.
I know. It's like they were tapping into the vibrational energy of the universe to
Yeah.
restore balance within themselves. And they were doing this thousands of years ago.
This is making me think about like the ancient practice of chanting. Could we view that as a form of sound healing too?
Absolutely. I mean, chanting, especially in a group, it creates this powerful resonance that can have calming effects. It can even help with pain relief. It's another example of how an ancient practice is finding its way back into modern holistic approaches.
This whole conversation is making me rethink so much about health and well-being. It's really inspiring.
Mhm.
What else can we learn from their emphasis on like living in harmony with nature?
Well, think about their concept of the orchard. Remember, that sacred space, embodying balance and abundance. It's a powerful reminder that we need nature to thrive. And the
Mhm.
pars, those beautiful garden houses. They also point towards the benefits of incorporating nature into our living spaces.
It makes you think about the modern trend of biophilic design, right?
Yeah.
Which is all about connecting people with nature in built environments. It's almost like we're rediscovering the wisdom of creating spaces that nurture our connection to the natural world.
Exactly. And there's a ton of research now showing that incorporating natural elements into our homes and workplaces, like natural light, plants, even sounds of nature, they can reduce stress, improve focus, just enhance overall well-being.
It all seems to circle back to this fundamental concept of interconnectedness, doesn't it?
Hmm.
The Mesopotamians, they understood that we're not separate from nature, but rather a part of this like larger web of life.
And that's a really powerful message for us today as we face challenges like climate change and all this environmental damage. It's a call to remember our connection to the natural world and to act in ways that support both our own well-being and the health of the planet.
This has been a truly eye-opening conversation. I'm so glad we took this deep dive into ancient Mesopotamian holistic health. What are some of the key takeaways, that our listeners can apply to their own lives today? As we wrap up our deep dive into Arminian's essay and all this ancient Mesopotamian wisdom, it just keeps striking me how much these ancient practices, actually resonate with so many modern trends in health and wellness. It's like we're rediscovering what they knew like thousands of years ago.
It really is. I mean, think about it. The Mesopotamians were all about the mind-body connection, and now we have whole scientific fields dedicated to that, like psychoneuroimmunology. They're figuring out exactly how our thoughts and emotions can impact our physical health.
It's a total shift, from just treating the symptom to really looking at the whole person.
Right. And their holistic perspective, it went beyond just the individual, too. Remember how they revered mothers as these keepers of wisdom? It shows how important that transfer of knowledge across generations really is.
Oh, that reminds me. There's one thing we talked about earlier that I still kind of don't get, that whole schmeckelhead concept.
Ah, schmeckelhead. It's one of those Yiddish terms, often used humorously. It describes someone who's kind of absent-minded, maybe a little too focused on intellectual stuff.
Okay, but how does that tie into like Mesopotamian health?
Well, when you think about their emphasis on harmony, right, being a schmecklehead could be seen as like a kind of imbalance. They might say that, being too much in your head without that grounding in the practical and emotional aspects of life, it could throw things off.
That's interesting. So true well-being, it's about integrating like all parts of ourselves, the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of it.
Exactly. And that brings us back to their ideas about language and consciousness, right? They believed that language, words, they have this power to shape reality, like a vibrational energy that can actually influence our well-being.
So it wasn't just what they said, but how they said it. They were aware of that, like subtle energy behind language.
Right, and that awareness, it even extended to their belief that consciousness could be preserved and even transferred through genetic information, which is pretty wild when you think about it.
It really is. Makes you wonder what they'd say about, like, all the stuff that influences our well-being today. We're bombarded with information all the time, right?
It's a good question. I bet they'd probably tell us to be more mindful of the information we take in, the words we speak, the environments we create for ourselves.
Maybe they'd remind us to, like, step away from the screens and get back to nature more. Really listen to those, like, whispers of wisdom you find in the wind and the trees.
I think they'd also emphasize kindness and compassion, remembering that our own well-being is connected to the well-being of everyone and everything around us.
So as we wrap up this amazing deep dive into ancient Mesopotamia, what are some, like, key takeaways for our listeners? What can they take with them from all this?
Well, I think it comes down to this. Remember that everything is connected. Nurture that connection to nature. Be kind, be compassionate, and pay attention to those, like, subtle energies that impact your well-being.
It's amazing how much we can learn from these ancient cultures, Their wisdom is so relevant even today. We hope you've enjoyed this journey back in time with us on The Deep Dive.